The cockpit screamed a warning, a piercing shriek that vibrated through Commander Thorne's bones. He wrestled the yoke, sweat stinging his eyes, while the crimson sands of Iridius whipped past the viewport at speeds that defied physics. Beside him, High Priestess Vala wasn't chanting her people's litanies of destruction. She was holding on, her knuckles white, her gaze locked on him with a terrified intensity that had nothing to do with the warlord Kale's blockade forming in the upper atmosphere. "They are locking weapons," she shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the straining engines. "Let them," Thorne gritted out, banking the ship hard enough to pull G's that would crush a lesser pilot. "We have the payload. We have the truth." He glanced at her, his eyes dropping momentarily to her midsection where her hand rested protectively. Two species, one impossible heartbeat. The Galactic Council would call it an abomination. They would call it the end of the war. "Hold on, Vala," he commanded, the raw, reckless Terran spirit flaring within him as he armed the thrusters. "We are punching through. 12 hours earlier. The quiet on Iridius was deceptive. It was a classic death worlder, paradise-scorching heat, crushing gravity, and silica storms that could strip flesh from bone in seconds. Commander Thorne stepped out of his dropship, the heat shimmering off the plating like a mirage. He scanned the horizon, expecting an ambush, a trap, or a battalion. He didn't expect her. High Priestess Vala stood amidst the ancient ruins of the communications array, her alien silhouette sharp against the blinding sun. For years, she had been the face of the enemy, the cold architect of human defeat. "You are late, human," she said, her tone sharp, though her posture betrayed a rare exhaustion. "And you are far from home," Thorne countered, hand hovering near his holster. Diplomacy failed, but biology found a way to bring them to this desolate rock. They were investigating a silent outpost, a supposed neutral zone where the signals had simply stopped. But as Thorne scanned the perimeter, the trap sprung, not from Vala, but from the sky above. Sabotage charges detonated the dropship's fuel cells, the explosion throwing them both to the ground. "Kale," Vala hissed, looking up as a containment field flickered into existence, sealing them in the valley. "We need cover," Thorne barked, grabbing her arm to haul her up. The contact sent a jolt through him, a strange static electricity that shouldn't have been possible between their species. She didn't pull away. They retreated into a subterranean bunker as the radiation storm, the planet's unique signature, began to rise. This wasn't a pristine science fiction story from the Golden Age archives. This was gritty reality. The radiation here was known to warp shielding, but as they sat in the dim light, Thorne realized it was doing something else entirely. "The environmental variables can theoretically alter biological imperatives," the briefing had said. He hadn't realized it meant this. The air in the bunker grew heavy, charged with the magnetic tension that blurred the line between combat and something far more primal. "They call you Space Orcs," Vala murmured, her defenses lowering as the fever of the radiation took hold. "Brutes, monsters. And you are the apex predator," Thorne replied, his voice rough. He knelt beside her, checking her vitals, his hand brushing against her neck. The heat radiating off her was intoxicating. "Yet here we are, hiding from the same hunter." Political polarization often relies on maintaining the otherness of the enemy, but in the heat of that bunker, the otherness evaporated. Common survival instincts often override historical prejudices. Thorne looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a high priestess, but a survivor. The hatred that had fueled their war for a decade was replaced by a sudden, terrifying clarity. The only thing deadlier than the war is the truth, and the truth was that they were no longer enemies. As the storm raged outside, burying their escape route in sand, Thorne realized that human ingenuity alone wouldn't save them. They needed something stronger. They needed to evolve. The comms panel exploded in a shower of sparks, forcing Thorne to fly blind. He banked the interceptor hard to the left, diving toward the churning sand dunes rather than the open sky. "What are you doing?" Vala demanded, though her hands were already flying across the auxiliary console, rerouting power to the forward shields. Her trust in him was absolute, a terrifying weight that settled in his chest. "I'm waking the neighbors," Thorne growled. He pushed the throttle to maximum, The ship screened toward the surface, the G-force pressing them into their seats. This was the epitome of HFY, the refusal to accept the impossible odds. Behind them, Kale's hunter-killer drones mimicked their descent, locking onto their heat signature. Thorn leveled out with meters to spare, the ship's belly skimming the crest of the dunes. He fired the seismic charges not at the enemy but directly into the sand below. The response was immediate. The ground didn't just shake, it ruptured. A colossal sand leviathan, disturbed from its slumber, erupted from the silica sea. It was a monolith of biology, a living mountain of scales and rage that eclipsed the sun. The beast snapped its jaws, catching 3 of Kale's drones in a single devastating bite. "Pull up!" Vala screamed, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. Thorn yanked the yoke back. The ship shot vertical, riding the shockwave of the beast's emergence. The blockade overhead faltered, their sensors blinded by the massive biological signature in the chaos below. It was the opening they needed. "Hold on to me," Thorn said, though he meant it more for himself. They punched through the atmospheric breach, leaving the confusion of Iridius behind. As the stars replaced the sand, silence reclaimed the cockpit. He slumped back, adrenaline crashing, and looked at Vala. She was trembling, hands still resting on her abdomen. "We made it," she whispered, the fierce high priestess replaced by something softer, something new. Thorn unbuckled and reached across the console, his hand covering hers. The heat between them was no longer just survival. It was a promise. When they materialized in the Council's jurisdiction, the reception was hostile. Weapons locked onto their crippled vessel. Warlord Kale was already there via hologram, spinning his narrative of human aggression. But Thorn and Vala didn't come with weapons. They came with data. They broadcasted the logs of Kale's sabotage, the manufactured war, and the falsified attacks. "That is a fabrication." Kale roared over the link. "Humans and my people cannot coexist. We are oil and water." Vala stepped into the transmission field. She looked regal, undeniable, and visibly changed. "You speak of impossibility," she said, her voice echoing through the grand chamber. "Yet you ignore the evidence of life." She displayed the medical scan taken in the bunker. It wasn't just data. It was a miracle. A dual helix structure, weaving Terran DNA with her own. A hybrid. The impossible heartbeat echoed through the council chambers, silencing the politicians and the generals. It was the ultimate sci-fi twist, not a weapon of mass destruction, but a creation of mass unity. The council, stunned into silence, looked from the warlord to the scan. The existence of the child shattered the foundation of the war. To destroy the parents would be to destroy the first bridge between their worlds. "Humanity has a saying," Thorn said, his voice steady as he stood beside her. "A unified front against the galaxy. Life finds a way." Kale's transmission was cut. The blockade orders were rescinded. As the ceasefire orders flooded the channels, Thorn looked at Vala. They had won the battle, but the real challenge, raising a child of 2 worlds, was just beginning.